Altogether, there were 8 seasons of the teams. They began performing at the high school basketball game halftimes and worked their way onto the national stage. So tonight we're going to hear about the experience of the Basketeers through the eyes of 3 of the members of the Basketeers. So we're happy to have with us tonight on the 70th anniversary Jim Meese, who was a member of teams 2 and 3, Don Maurer, who was a member of teams 4, 5, and 6, and Colby Byrom, who rounded things out playing on teams 7 and 8. So I have some questions that I'm going to use to get them started talking, but they can just talk about whatever they want to if they don't like my questions. So just have a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to start out with a question about the Harlem Globetrotters, but before I do that, I'm going to introduce Andy Liptak, who is here with us tonight. He was a referee at Harlem Globetrotter games. One game. So at the end, if you have any questions for him, well, we can do that. At this time, in the 1950s, the Harlem Globetrotters were really the only nationally known professional basketball team. So, as young men, were you aware of the Harlem Globetrotters before you became a Basketeer?
Absolutely.
Vaguely.
Vaguely, okay. Okay, so at the start of your journey, how did you become a Basketeer? In today's day and age, we have tryouts for everything. So did you have to try out to become a Basketeer? And did you know the tricks before you became a Basketeer?
Probably should start since first one, is this on?
Yep.
Okay, I was the first outsider outside of 6th Street Elementary School. George was coaching the 6th Street basketball team, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And he would give them like 15 minutes after practice just to do whatever they wanted. And they started, messing around doing some of these tricks. And George kind of thought, they're doing pretty good. So he kept working with them. And for some reason, George came to me and said, Jim, would you like to be on the Basketeers? And I was the first outsider. I was from Dover Avenue. Yay. How many Dover Avenue people we have? Look at it. But anyhow, so he invited me to come down, and I went down and watched him practice, and then he started breaking me in as a sub. And my first performance, now this guy went to Hollywood.
No.
He went to Hollywood. You missed it by a year.
I did.
You missed it by a year. Anyhow, he went to Hollywood, and my first show was at York Elementary School. And my second show was at Dundee High School. Jack Reese was the basketball coach out there, and he invited us out to their banquet, and we did a show for Dundee Bulldogs. So that was the real start of the things. He's a nice guy.
I came along towards the tail end of everything. These guys did all the work. I say George planted, these guys watered, God gave the increase, and I got to reap the benefit. But I'm sure Don will tell you about his tryouts. We didn't have tryouts. I think as a result of Don's experience with that group, George decided he wasn't going to have tryouts. But my year, when I got selected, it was myself and Kenny Corns, and what George would do, he would go around to all the grade schools and watch kids practice and do all the things and everything, and he made a selection from that group. And basically, it was no easy task. We always got basketball season didn't start till what, October, November, or we started practicing about August, July or August. Everybody else is out at Atwood swimming and everything, and we're in the gym working out at Memorial Hall. And you know how hot Memorial Hall can be. And that's where we spent a lot of our summers, that Memorial Hall getting ready. And you ask if we knew that stuff before. No. Nobody had an ideal. Kind of give you an idea, I'm sure it's the same with them. We broke our life up, our practices up into 15-second segments and 30-second segments. When you were whipping the ball, passing it through your legs, back and forth, you had to do that for like 15 seconds without making a mistake. And then when it came to dribble, you had to dribble for 30 consecutive seconds without making a mistake. If you made a mistake, you did it over. And sometimes you had to do it over so many times. George said, all right, I'm gonna give you a break, take 5 minutes and we'll be back. We'll start all over again. But, I'll let them tell you about theirs, and then I'll get to, I guess, finish up.
We'll be back. Excuse me. My experience was a little different from Jim and Colby's because, first of all, I've been asked in later years, how did George pick the people he picked? And Jim's the one that explained it to me very succinctly. He said he was a coach. He saw every 4th and 5th and 6th grade player throughout the season and knew who he wanted to pick. But I can remember the evening at East School when a ball-headed man stepped inside the door and watched practice. I just saw that, but then we continued to have practice. And afterward, Bob Catcut, who was not only an outstanding fireman, but the volunteer coach of the East School Bobcats, said that man would like to talk to you. And so I went over and he introduced himself and said he was the coach of the Dover Basketeers and he would like me to try out. And I told him I'd have to go home and ask my mom and dad. And my dad said he thought he had heard of the Basketeers. So anyhow, I tried out. That summer, Keith Marburger and I, and 2 other boys, young boys, spent the whole summer learning everything. So I'm different than Colby a little bit because, hey, I knew that stuff then. By the end of the summer, that's what we did. We dribbled, we passed, we learned to shoot with both hands. And we did all of that the entire summer. And George waited till the exact end of the summer until he finally called us into the locker room at Memorial Hall and said, I've decided on Keith and Don. All right, those words will ring in my ear as long as I can hear things. So then we started practicing with the group that was coming back. I was replacing Jim. And that's easy for me to say. No, Jim and Bill Davis, but it's tough to replace Jim. But we were the 2 new ones, and they were the ones that had moved on. But I thought that was a great advantage, that Keith and I blended in pretty quickly with the team. And that was my experience. It was also I realized this too. I think that was exceptionally hard for George Elford. For one thing, I think he just waited and waited the whole summer. I thought he could have picked me about midway through the summer. Anyhow, no, and I just don't think he ever did that again. So that's my experience of joining the team, and we can get to the stories that follow.
Okay, so I know George Elford was a big part of all of your experience, so it's time for George Elford stories.
George Elford stories. Well, George meant a lot to me, and my family situation wasn't the greatest at that point, but George gave me a lot of leadership qualities, I think, that I used later on in life as a coach, a teacher. I get kind of emotional about George. I can remember he wanted us to be so good when we traveled and stayed overnight at these different colleges that he actually had Judy Bay come down to Memorial Hall and teach us how to dance. He wanted to make sure we went to college someplace, and we were at party afterwards. He wanted to make sure we knew how to dance. And I also heard a story, now this didn't happen when I was there, but he had all the guys take ties. I don't know if you guys are involved in that, but everybody took a tie. Were you involved in that?
Yeah.
Well, that's because you were going to Hollywood. But he made all the guys bring ties down, and he taught them how to tie a Windsor tie. So they looked nice and they traveled, and you guys did. Thank you. But George was just he was a super nice guy. And I can remember going out to Atwood in the summer and laying on the beach with George and a bunch of other Basketeers. And George would lay there for most of the time. And then George had this, he had this real slow, long stroke when he swam. And he would go out the deep end out by the raft. And there you'd see this bald-headed guy, and all you'd see is his head come up once in a while, big, long strokes. But he really enjoyed being with us, I think, as much as we enjoyed being with him. But a lot of good memories, and I'm sure these guys have some others.
George was more than a coach to us. He was a mentor, and he taught us a lot about character. I mean, you didn't get out of line. He taught you how to act, taught you what to say, how to speak to people, taught us that when you look at people, when you're talking to somebody, look them in the eye, look them straight in the eye when you're talking to them. When you shake hands, give them a good, firm handshake, you know, let them know that you really mean it. And right before he dissolved the Basketeers, George took me on a ride. Now I'm going to be like Jim, get emotional. He took me on a ride and he gave me a talk about the facts of life. And he said, Colby, I know you won't understand what I'm telling you now, but one day you will, you know, you will understand it. He said, as you grow older, you're going to see a lot of things in life, and you may not necessarily agree with everything. He said, but I'm telling you what, he said, you're a good person, and he said, whatever you do, don't change. Stay the same. Don't change. And to this day, I tried to be that same person without, you know, changing. It's hard sometimes, but I try anyway.
I feel pretty lucky because when I moved back to Dover in 1992, I got to spend a lot of time with George, and we would reminisce. And there's two things he said to me that I thought were indicative of how he approached not only how he handled the success of the Basketeers, but just his whole life. But he told me one time, he said, I would sit on the bench and watch you boys perform, and I was always amazed. And I said, George, you're the one that taught us all that. But he was just, I mean, that's what he said. The thing that I remember most, besides what Jim said and Colby said about how he was always concerned about our behavior, was he said this. And when we started going to even bigger and better places, he said it more. They won't remember your name, but they'll remember where you're from. You're representing Dover. And that has never left me. The other thing was a comment and a conversation we had in sometime in the 90s. And I said, my first year on the team, I was a little sixth grader and everybody was older. And in practice, we had to pair up with another Basketeer and go through all the passes that we would perform. And you rotated. You had somebody different. So I said to George, I said, you know, I was just that little sixth grader and everybody took it easy on me and threw, you know, were nice to me. They didn't throw the ball very hard except Jim Schweitzer. I said, Jim fired that ball at me as hard as he could. I said, he wasn't doing me any favors. You know what George said? He said he was doing you a favor because he was treating you like an equal. I've never forgotten that either. It lets you know a little bit of how the man looked at life and how he interpreted things. And like these two, you try to live up to that.
Okay, you've talked about this a little bit with the schedule of practice that you practice more than the regular teams when you started earlier. So I'm sure you have lots of stories about things that went on at practice.
I have one I'll never forget. We would do a shooting drill, and every guy would take a right-hand layup, and then a left-hand hook shot, and then a left-hand layup and a right-hand hook shot. You were allowed to miss 4 shots out of all 6 of the guys. If you missed more than 4, we added 1. And we always started with 10. And I remember one day, it was Saturday afternoon, and it had to be probably close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think we had 23 to go. We just could not, you know, we'd get, miss 3 shots, knock 1 off. And then we'd turn around, miss 5 shots, add 1. And I think we must have had about 23 rounds. And I don't know if we ever did finish it, but we were there almost all Saturday afternoon. That was terrible. That was one thing I'll never forget.
I can only add that happened to me. The regular team was practicing, and it might have been Keith and I were practicing in the gym too, because we were going to join them. And I think Keith left, and George looked at me and he said, make 10, we would dribble and we'd shoot a ball, we'd shoot a layup. We'd take it behind our back and shoot a layup. He said, make 10 in a row and you can go home. If you miss, add 1. And I was there. And George was at the other end practicing with Jim for I don't know how long, and finally he looked down at the other end of the gym and said, are you still here? Because I was doing the same thing Jim described. I'd make 7 or 8 and then miss 1. And so he just said, go.
My story's the same.
If Keith was here, he would say this. I believe George's favorite 3 words were, do it again.
So we all know the story that Michael Jordan didn't make like his middle school basketball team or his high school basketball team. So you guys were doing something extra special as junior high students. So what did the rest of your athletic careers look like?
Well, I guess since I'm the oldest, I get to go first. I was fortunate. I lettered 3 years in basketball at Dover, and I lettered 2 years in football, and I lettered 3 years in track. So I was involved in 3 different sports, and we had a lot of success. My senior year in basketball was the only year we won the Cardinal Conference, and there was only like 5 teams at that time. It was just starting to grow as a conference. What do I want to say about that? Oh, our football team our senior year went undefeated, and I was fortunate to be one of the co-captains with Ed Luthy. Where's Ed? Hi, Ed. And Ed and I are still around. It's been a long time ago. That was back in 1961 when we went undefeated. That was the first undefeated team in Dover since 1942. So we were pretty proud of that. We tied 2 games, but we were 8-0-2. So that was the first undefeated season they had. And we lost the Cardinal Conference in football, but we won in basketball. I That makes no sense. We were undefeated. That's a good trivia question, Jim Worley. What team at Dover went undefeated in football and lost the Cardinal Conference? Is that possible? But I also ran, and a lot of that was pre-football season training. Right, Ed?
Yes.
We were lifting weights and getting ready for the fall season, but that was my experience as an athlete, and I enjoyed all 3 seasons.
For me, my athletic career was not as glamorous. I guess I could say it was probably downhill after the Basketeers. I did participate in football, lettered 2 times, 2 letters in football. We were undefeated. 10-0. Basketball, I got one of those faithful service awards. Tried baseball, that didn't work out. My senior year, I said, well, I'll get ready for college, so I'll go out for track, try to build up some speed. That didn't work. I did go to college and lettered 4 years in football at Capital University. And we did win the Amos Alonzo Stagg Bowl. Wasn't what it is now, but we won it nonetheless.
I'd like to interject something there. I went to Muskingum, and lettered 4 years at Muskingum. Capital never beat us. And we played the Grambling Rice Bowl and lost. We lost to Middle Tennessee State, which is a lot bigger school than Muskingum. But yeah, we had a lot of good games with Capital. As a matter of fact, the guy that played defensive back with me, Roger Welsh, became the head football coach at Capital.
Yes, he became athletic director too.
Then he became AD, right?
Did you beat Mount Union?
Everybody.
We never lost to Mount Union.
My high school career was the pure definition of the word average. And the story I tell is that when we were in Hollywood, we were paid. But we were paid as athletes, not as actors. And we were told if we accepted the money, we would be professionals. And if I would have known then what I found out later, I would have taken the money. But you're young and you have dreams. But I did spend 1 year on the bench of the Wittenberg University JV basketball team. I think they needed bench filled. But they and both guys know this. We went to Wittenberg all the time. The basketball Ray Mears. Ray Mears. And by the way, he and George were classmates, along with a third classmate by the name of Tom Patton. The only reason I got to sit on the bench that 1 year was because they remembered the Basketeers stuff. and that was it. But yeah, these are the athletes that Dover remembers, and that's fine. They deserve it.
Shocks me every time.
Okay, they've talked a lot about Hollywood, so we have a clip of the movie The Errand Boy. So give me a moment to make sure my technology works, and we'll get it up on the screen.
so many hours during the day I wasn't. Oh, this must be recess, huh? Yeah, I guess so. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Well, come on, we only got 20 more minutes for lunch. Where you at? I want to watch.
Okay, so talk about your experience in Hollywood, and then I know you guys also went and did a lot of other amazing things, so just talk about those things too.
I'll tell a few Hollywood stories and then let the other guys go, but first of all, it was wonderful to go out there. I'm going to let Colby tell his favorite Hollywood story. but what you saw there, we reported to the studio, I believe at 8 o'clock, and they filmed all day. And I can remember running down the stairs half a dozen times or more. And then I heard somebody say, okay, let's start the camera. But the Jerry Lewis you saw there was exactly the Jerry Lewis we met off camera, and the way he acted the whole afternoon, and he was terrific. One thing that actually found the cutting room floor was this. When they were filming him up against the wall watching us, there was a clip where he mouthed 3 letters, S-O-B. And everybody got a kick out of that. But he was every bit as nice and friendly and enjoyed us and everything that you can imagine. And again, if I don't hand the mic off now, I'll talk all evening about it. Well, one more was when we ran down the steps, went over there, you saw basket support, and I had a sport coat on. I was the one coming down the steps until Kirby beat me to the bottom. Anyhow, I took off my sport coat and I hung it on the support, and the whole day was going by. So I asked someone halfway through the day, I said, can I get my sport coat? And he said, kid, that sport coat has to stay there all day long. Can you imagine if we filmed and we spliced the film together and all of a sudden the sport coat disappears? And he said, you lose it, I'll get you another one. And I'm not sure I said any more after that.
Go ahead.
Before they departed on the trip, George told Kenny and I, said, well, you guys, they were already on the Basketeers already. They were the group. I mean, they did all the traveling, did all the shows. Kenny, Corns, and I, we were in training. We were the backup group. So George said, Cole, if anything ever happens to, Don or one of the guys, you guys might have to step in and make that trip to California and take their place. I told Don I didn't wish him any bad luck. Maybe twist his ankle or something. I didn't want him to break it or anything, but just twist it. That was big. And while I'm talking about that, we had one more trip, our transitional trip. We went to New York. George, there were 8 of us and George in that vehicle. Yeah. And needless to say, it was kind of crowded, luggage and everything. And we went up to the Adirondack Mountains in New York, and we were there for a week. What it was Dolph Shades. I don't know if a lot of you may not have heard of Dolph Shades, but he was a player for the, who's that, Rochester or? Syracuse Nationals. And I think you guys performed in Syracuse. Did you guys?
Yes.
Okay, they performed in Syracuse. Dolph liked him so much, he invited them to his summer camp. He had a week-long camp. And anybody that was anything in basketball was at his camp. I mean, he had like Red Auerbach and sit there chomping on a cigar and everything else. And countless of other big-time coaches and big-time players. And the kids that were there were these kids from like New York City and all of that. I mean, it was the place to be for basketball. By the time we left, rims were all bent down and everything, dunking the ball. But when we initially got there, Don and Butchie did the initial performance, and before we left, Kenny and I got to do the departing show. So it was like a transitional period for us, but it was like a week. It was unbelievable. And Dolph Shades, I don't know if his son Rudy Shades, he ended up playing for the Denver Nuggets. So yeah, but it was a great camp, and that was a good way for you to go out, good way for us to enter.
I have 2 quick stories. I think they'll be quick, I hope. I remember performing at Canton at the Civic Center up there. And the Globetrotters were playing one of the teams that traveled with him, they played all the time. And we were putting our show on at halftime, and Goose Tatum came out and got in our circle. We were doing our circle, passing the ball, and he got right across from me. And he was whipping that ball so fast, and he threw it to me and hit me in the chest, and I think it knocked me almost back to the foul line. And I remember that story, and I remember coming in the locker room after we did a show up there, I think the Harlem Magicians that time, and walked in there, and here are all these professional basketball players sitting around, and one guy was smoking a big cigar. I was crushed. I couldn't believe it. You know, you think, you know, these are athletes, and they're sitting in there, can of beer, big cigar. That really made a terrible impression. I never did forget it.
I just wanted to add one thing about the movie, just one. The person, and it's understandable unless you're not old and also a big sports fan, but the person that gave us a lecture at the end of the scene was Leo DeRocher. And if you know anything about baseball, the name will ring a bell. His most famous quote is, "Nice guys finish last." And yet he gave us that speech on sportsmanship. I think we got off to a real good start in Hollywood, because when we were still in the airport with our Basketeer gym bags, a bunch of guys across the way went walking past. It was a group of men. And one of them yelled, "Hey, look, guys, it's the Basketeers." And it was a professional baseball team. I thought it was the Milwaukee Brewers, but it could have been Minnesota. I'm not sure. But they had heard of us or knew us. How's that make you feel?
Tell the story about the Lakers, the Boston Celtics.
That's Colby.
Yeah.
Colby, tell that story. Yeah.
That was probably the best weekend I had as a Basketeer. We were scheduled for two times. We were to show at the Madison Square Garden on Saturday. You know, like they have the college games, big time college sports on Saturday. So we performed the halftime show there at Madison Square Garden. And that night, they treated you pretty nice when you were on these trips. I mean, we stayed at the Waldorf Astoria. And in spite of George's warnings, could you imagine some 10, 11-year-old kids walking around at 11 o'clock at night playing tag on the elevator, people walking around in fur coats and all that stuff. We're scurrying around. George would have called us, he'd have killed us. But anyway, after that show, the next day we were to perform at the Boston Gardens. The Boston Celtics were playing the Los Angeles Lakers. So it was cold, and we were getting ready to fly out, and the plane was iced over. So we had to wait till they de-iced the plane and all of that. By the time they got it de-iced and we got back, it got into Boston, talked to the guy, you know, he said, "Well, I'm sorry." He said, "Well, halftime is over, but tell you what," he said, "if you guys want to stick around, you can put on a show after the game." He said, "Nobody's going to be here." He said, "Everybody after the game," he said, "everybody leaves. They're like, to get the heck out of there, you know." So we agreed to that, and after the game was over, they announced that we were going to be performing, and nobody left. The film that you see from Boston Gardens with the parquet floor and all of that, and everybody in the stands, that was after the Boston Celtics game. Now that did put us off schedule again, and we missed our plane to fly back into Pittsburgh. So the Los Angeles Lakers graciously, "Well, we got room on our plane, why don't you guys fly off?" So needless to say, we flew back on the plane with the Boston Celtics, and me and my naivety, or whatever you want to call it, I didn't know that much. And these guys playing, you know, penny ante poker and all that stuff. I think Kenny Corns made a killing on that.
Any other, like, memories like that?
First of all, I should be sitting in the middle. To give you a little history of how this, Jim he was in year 2. They were still original, and they drive around in Georgia station wagon, like I said.
No. It was a 53 Chevy.
Okay.
That was the first thing. That's before the station wagon came.
And that's the Basketeers. And then in my years, 4, 5, and 6, we went from that to getting a nationwide notoriety. And again, I could spend the evening about the trip to Hollywood. They put us up. While we waited to be called to Paramount Studios, we went and saw a football game, an exhibition game at the Coliseum. We spent a day at Disneyland, which wasn't that old then. You know, it was 61. And so, yeah, they treated us. Going back, the story I like to tell too is one that always needs a bit of an explanation, because you can name drop, and not everybody knows this. But when we were in New York, we ate at Jack Dempsey's restaurant. And he came to our table, and we have pictures taken, and you can see two of the littler Basketeers. They're all little, but they, you know, doing that. Jack was right there at the table. He came over and talked to us, and you have to be knowledgeable, I guess, but the older I get, the more I think, wow, what a time to live.
Okay, your favorite or funniest memory? You don't have to be politically correct necessarily, as you like. You can tell us some really good stories right now if you want to.
Good story. Well, I can think of a couple, but we performed at Ohio University, and George's vehicle broke down, and we couldn't come back. So we spent the night, and the next morning, my buddy Judy Davis, who's not here, he and I roomed together all the time on away trips that we stayed overnight. And a couple of these fraternity brothers said, "Would you like to take a ride in my new car?" And we said, "Well, yeah, that'd be great." So this guy had a Corvette. And I don't know if you've ever been down to you, but there's one straight strip going out of Athens. And I remember Judy was sitting, I was sitting in the passenger seat. This guy was driving, and Judy was kind of sitting on the console. And this guy ran this Corvette up to 140 miles an hour. And here's a couple, 13-year-old kids sitting there. I think Judy's eyes were bigger than mine. And we were both scared to death. And then he brought us back, and there was a mental hospital. For some reason, he thought we ought to ride through that mental hospital. So he took us back through the mental hospital, and all these people having their problems. And we got back, and another guy had an Oldsmobile, and he thought he'd like to take us for a ride. So Judy and I got in this Oldsmobile out the same road. This guy just tramps this thing and floors it. I think he had his up to about 110. And I'd never heard of that kind of speed. But those were two things I'll never forget. We had to stay overnight, and Bill Schweitzer came down to pick us up the next day. I don't know whatever happened to George's vehicle. I don't know when he got it back, but Bill Schweitzer came and got us all back to Dover. But what was it? There was another story. Well, I'll think about that one. I don't know about that story. I don't know if I want to share that.
My stories aren't funny, they're just kind of unique. I guess one of the first ones, we played at Philadelphia, Philadelphia, they weren't the 76ers back then, I'm trying to think.
Warriors.
Philadelphia Warriors, yeah. And Lou Alcindor was there, not Lou Alcindor. Wilt Chamberlain was there. We looked at Wilt, we thought, well, he must be the tallest man we ever seen. Anyway, we went ahead and we did the show and, got to meet all the players and everything. And while I was at Capitol, after Wilt retired, he was playing professional volleyball. He was traveling around, going to different places playing volleyball. And he was at Capitol University. He had one game. They played a game at Capitol. And he was in his car getting ready to leave. And I said, hey, Wilt, this is Colby Byrom, Dover Basketeers. He said, stop the car. We sat there and we had conversation for about 5 or 10 minutes. It was nice to know that he, he remembers, Another incident we did was, not an incident, but, and we performed in Troy, Ohio. We performed at the halftime of the Harlem Globetrotters. I don't know if you had that game, but. Oh, okay. It was halftime of the Harlem Globetrotters, and Ebony magazine was there, and they had me and Metal Lark and all the guys and everybody. They took a bunch of pictures and everything, and had a featured story that was in Ebony magazine. So I got a few kicks out of that. So, and needless to say, the Harlem Globetrotters were not our favorite fans, They, kind of like one of those, well, these little kids can do this stuff. That kind of diminishes George made sure he pointed that out. They were our favorite fans.
When my last year on the team, we were invited to Milwaukee for a sportsman show, and it's a sportsman show on just what you would imagine, hunting and fishing and that type of thing. But they wanted us there, and they wanted us there for a week. And the Dover administration, because they said we can we'll tutor them for a week. Well, we didn't go for a week. That got nixed, but we did go for a long weekend. And it was unusual because they had a canvas-covered platform for us to perform on. There wasn't any basket anywhere. There were campers, but so we did our show like that. I don't know for the whole weekend. But at the other end of that platform was a pond. And I just knew that when we were in our circle making fancy passes, that sooner or later, the ball would end up in the pond. And it did, and I remember laughing. And I then remember when I quit laughing, I got yelled at by George because I laughed. But anyhow, that was unique. I'm going to tell this story too. It's not a good one, but it was educational, and it's also an illustration of George Elford. We were in St. Louis for the NBA Western Conference Championship game. It was going to be on national television. So we were there, and we were walking the streets of St. Louis looking for a restaurant to get lunch. And George, there were 6 of us in George. So we were the 7. I was walking beside George, and we were walking up the long sidewalk to the restaurant, and I know that the rest of the group was trailing behind. And a gentleman stepped out the door, put his hand up, and he said, "I cannot serve the black." That was Ernie Cato, my classmate, the gentleman that I roomed with that whole 8th grade year. And before anything else happened, George pivoted and started walking down the sidewalk and said, "We're not eating here." And I know that 2 or 3 of the other guys, they were going, What's wrong? they didn't hear it. And I've asked other Basketeers over the years, I said, do any of you other guys know what happened? I said, I do, because I was standing right beside George. And I think Kirby told me one time, he said, I thought I heard it, but I wasn't sure. They were just trailing so far behind. I tell that story because you always say travel is educational and you learn things, and we were just small town boys, but that was pretty educational, and it's also an example of the kind of man George Elford was. I had never seen him pivot and walk so fast.
I have a couple things here I'd like to share. This is not necessarily Basketeers, but we're connected in some way. When we traveled to Wittenberg, the reason we did was Ray Mears was from Dover, and he was the head basketball coach. So I looked up on the internet. I've had this for quite some time, because I don't have internet anymore. You know, once you get to be 81, you don't need internet. But anyhow, Ray Mears, when he was at Wittenberg, his record was 121 wins and 23 losses. And from there, he was invited to be the head coach at Tennessee. So he left Wittenberg and went to Tennessee. And at Tennessee, he was twice named the SEC Coach of the Year in '67 and '77. He coached 12 All-Americans at Tennessee. His winning percentage was .747 of all the games he coached in college. And his record in 21 years as a college basketball coach was 399 wins and 135 losses. That's incredible. But that's how we hooked up with Wittenberg, was through him. Then I was looking at something else here about Tennessee, and he started the Big Orange at Tennessee, and he always wore his orange sport coat to games. And it says here, he got that idea from Big Red, Steubenville Big Red, how that stuck on. So he thought Big Orange at Tennessee. And he would walk around the entire perimeter of the floor before a basketball game, both engaging and enraging opposing teams' fans. And once at an away game, the team was eating at a restaurant, and the restaurant thought it would be funny to make orange jello. Mears got very mad, and the man had to go to the store, buy green jello, prepare it and serve it, because they always ate green jello. And this guy thought he was going to make them orange jello. Not for Ray, it wasn't. That was one thing. And then I have the Harlem, or the All-American Redheads. I don't know if you guys ever heard of them, but they were around for 50 years. And it was an all-girls basketball team. Matter of fact, they had 3 teams that traveled. And we performed at one of their games. That's how I remember the All-American Redheads. And the Globetrotters, we talked about Globetrotters earlier, they had 20,000 exhibition games in 118 countries. That's unbelievable when you think about that. And the number of games that they won, they didn't lose too many, but they did lose in, what year was it? I think it was 1929, they lost the game. And then they went on, they won, like 2,000 in a row before they ever lost another one. But their winning streak was just incredible. And then another one we performed with was Hot Rod Huntley. Everybody hear that? Out of West Virginia? Well, I've got a little brochure here that I'm gonna let you guys pass around and take a look at. And then also I have another little thing here that presenting the Dover Basketeers. I'll pass that thing around, send that on its way. Here's another one in black and white they can look at. And then Buckeye Sports. There's a nice article in here about the Basketeers and pictures of the later groups that were more well-known than the rest of us. I don't know, I'm not sure what group this is. There's Rick Haynes right there. I'll pass that around too. Is that your group?
No, that was yours.
You were with Rick, weren't you?
I was with Rick, but I think this is the year after.
Okay.
That's it. Right now.
Jim, you probably have another question.
Yeah. How did the Basketeers end?
I think we'd all like to talk on that, but I think the person that can talk best would be Colby on how they ended. Maybe?
What happened to uniforms and all that stuff?
George did, he kept the uniforms and he tried to give them away. He offered people the different, players' uniforms, and I got part of one, but,
Is that it?
no, that's not it. But, I think it was a number of reasons why George got terminated the Basketeers. I would say that, after 8 years, he probably got tired of it, but I don't really think that's the case, I personally think George was getting a lot of pressure from the community because the Basketeers were up and coming and famous, and everybody wanted their child, their boy, to be on the Basketeers, and George, he just couldn't put everybody on there or anybody on there, only, qualified people. And I'm sure he heard that on more than, one occasion, well, why did you pick my son? He's a good basketball player. She's a good basketball player. And I'm sure that weighed heavily on George because he was a people person. What does the song say? You can't please everybody, so you might as well please yourself. Yeah. And he wasn't the kind that was going to please himself. He just wanted to be happy-go-lucky, everybody's happy, Shangri-La type community. But things started to change back then, and I think he became a little uncomfortable, and that's when he and I had our drive, and we had our little personal talk. He explained a few things to me, so it was interesting. And I don't think they could ever be replicated again. Todd Ramsey was in New Jersey. He said he tried to formulate I say New Jersey. He was in Rockville, Maryland. And he said he tried on several occasions to get a group of kids together to do the things that we did. And in this day and age, that's not going to be possible, I don't think, because the first time one of the kids go crying to their mama, George yelled at me, and the police would be knocking on his door and getting for child abuse and that. But we didn't even think about protesting or coming back telling anything about it. Of course, we all grew up in the day when everybody had a license to discipline you. You don't care who it was, If you got disciplined at school, you got home, you got disciplined again. It's just not like that now. I think that's half the trouble with this country. You don't have any, no structure and no criticism or punishment. You can't really punish people today. Everybody's a winner, I think George just was at his wit's end with the whole thing.
What year was that?
That was
63.
1963.
I had, and Jim and Colby were both there, but again, after I returned, the more George and I talked, I decided to have a reunion. And about a third of the Basketeers, I invited everybody I could contact, but about a third of us were there at a Basketeer reunion. And I'll tell you two quick things. That very question was asked, and I always think Colby had that great advantage, Colby and Todd in particular, of being with George last year and seeing what kind of signs they might have noticed. But at the reunion, somebody asked George, and here's what he said. he said, I was taking care of my mother, and she was dying. But also, George did everything. As Colby alluded to, he answered every piece of mail, and he did all the scheduling, and he did all of that. And a testament that if Jim Schweitzer were, if he were Union, he said, George, I never understood or appreciated all the things you did until I had children myself. And that's coming from Jim Schweitzer, who was a tough guy. So, but the other prevailing sentiment is the one that Colby expressed, and I said this to George once. I said, George, you couldn't coach the way you did then. And he looked at me and said, yes, I could. I didn't want to argue with him, and I didn't want to mention health forms and waivers and parental things and taking 6 kids in a station wagon. Okay.
I lost my train of thought. See, once you get to be 81, you forget things quick.
What I'm going to say about George.
I'm not sure, but if it comes back to me, I'll...
Okay, we're gonna open it up for just a little bit for some questions. So anybody has a question? All right, I saw back there first.
Hey, my father-in-law was Bill Evergood, so I just wanted to know if you had any Bill Evergood stories.
Jim will probably have more than me, but I'll just tell you, going back to the reunion, and it's a case where, you know, we've all been young once, and you look up to older people. So I knew Bill. I remember him as a player and an athlete in Dover. And so he came to the reunion, and he said, hello, who are you? But Bill and I became friends, and he was always filled with ideas on, you know, we have Hall of Fames for everything. And he was always saying, hey, Donnie, have you thought about this, thought about that? And he was just a terrific guy that I got to know late in life, but he was. Jim.
I can't think of anything unusual about Bill. He was just a great friend, and last year was a bad year for the Basketeers. We lost 3 members. We lost Cal Woods, and we lost Bill Levengood, and we lost Bob Fights. And so that, there was only 24 of us to start it, and I think there's 10 deceased already. So they've gone by the wayside pretty fast. But I remember what I was going to talk about. I think what affected George a lot to give up the Basketeers, other than what you guys mentioned, he traveled 16,000 miles with these guys, flying all over the place, working 5 days a week at Marlite, and getting on airplanes and flying and taking care of your sick mom. And I think all that just got the best out of you.
I didn't know Bill early. I got to know him later on in life, after Don started having the reunions. And Bill had several at his place out in Pearl. We went out there a couple of times, and he loved the Basketeers. And I noticed that the players that he was associated with, they loved him. Probably one of the main ones is Cal Woods. Him and Cal, when they were thick as thieves. Even when he'd go to Mexico, Cal would be right behind him. He's down in Mexico talking about how good the fishing is and all that. He'd come back home. And even in the last days, he was sick and he was dying, but you never would have known that he was that sick. And he was still traveling. I think he went to Europe one of his last trips. Right up to the end, he said, I'm not going to take this sitting down, whatever it is. I'm gonna go fighting. And he fight. I think I saw him a week before he passed down at the coffee shop, and he was still circulating and talking to people and just sharing. But he was a great individual. And I think that's indicative of the type of people that George looked for. If you weren't like that when you came to the Basketeers, by God, you better be like that when you leave.
Did you guys go out of the United States?
I know in the my 3 years, no, but I don't think we ever did, no. Do you want to tell them the story about the proposed European trip or not? Yeah, I think it was Todd Ramsey said, you know, there was some loose talk that the Globetrotters wanted to take us with them to Europe, and but Todd just mentioned that Colby and Todd, and the three of us were sitting around, they were bringing me up to date on the last couple of years. I don't think that ever got off the ground. So no, the answer is no.
Did he ever mention anything, if any of the kids let loose with the three-point shot, which was known for there when they played, when you guys played?
Oh, we didn't have the three-point shot.
Right, yeah. But you know, did any players attempt it, and then the coach gave them a few good words about it?
I don't think we ever shot a long shot.
No, Alan's question pertains to the game of basketball, which is a good one, but I have always believed, and these two can jump in, we never practiced what a basketball coach would practice. We didn't practice defense. We didn't pass, plays or blocking out or rebound. We didn't practice basketball things. As Colby mentioned earlier, we had our routine, and we went through every segment of that until it was correct, and went to the next segment, and then we put it all together. And so it really wasn't basketball like that. It was, and George always called it the show.
The show, it was for show.
The longest shot wasn't actually a shot. It was Steve Trustor. He always ended the show with a drop kick from midcourt. And believe it or not, on more than one occasion, he made that. People go nuts.
Any more questions?
Yeah, just go through your routine, like, or how long would it take?
Colby and I were talking about, Jim, what do you think, 10 minutes? 15, 10?
It took most of the halftime.
Yeah.
Between halves of the basketball game, about 12 to 15 minutes probably.
And then what did you do all?
Well, we were introduced. We were introduced one at a time. We went out and stood on the foul line. And when the sixth guy came out, then we peeled off. And if you saw the film, you saw that tip drill that we went back and forth. It was 25 passes we had to make in 25 seconds. Excuse me, 75 passes in 25 seconds. So, and then after that, and I actually kind of forget the order, but we imitated a football skit where we got in a huddle, went out, and then Steve drop kicked it, or somebody would drop kick it. And then we played baseball. We lined up like baseball, where there was a pitcher and a batter, and he hit the ball, and he ran around the bases, and a catcher, and when he got to home plate, he would stop. I think Colby did this. He'd stop and he'd yell, "Look!" and then he'd slide in save. And these were imitations of the Harlem Globetrotters tricks. Then we all would dribble individually. We would all go out on the court one at a time, and we'd dribble just for a short time, and then we would dribble to the nearest basket and shoot a wraparound layup. We'd wrap around and shoot a layup, and we did that. And I might be missing something, but then we finished with the circle.
Two-man
Two-man drill.
Okay. Go ahead.
Three.
Yeah, go ahead. I forgot that.
Yeah. We'd pair up all three circles, and one guy would stand, the other guy would dribble between the guy's leg, and do all kinds of silly stuff. And then the shooting drill that he mentioned, we shot a layup. The first guy peeled off, took it behind his back, and shot the layup. And then everybody would shoot the right-hand layup and the left-hand hook and the left-hand layup and the right-hand hook. And that's where you could only miss 4 shots or less. And the rest of the story we already talked about.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I forgot the shooting drill. But Colby, did we forget anything?
Nope, that's it.
And I'm sorry I can't think of the order. I can't think of the order of that, but yes.
How about singing your theme song?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not allowed to say. But the story goes that the Harlem Globetrotters did Sweet George Brown, and I believe, at least for the first year. Jim, did they do it your year too? Sweet George Brown?
No, I think we were Rock Around the Clock.
It was Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley in the comments, and you know the song, or you can look it up, and it was more, it had a better rhythm than that, and it looked better with little kids trying to dribble, I think. I think that's part of it. Okay.
We'll let Andy tell about the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah.
Okay, the Harlem Globetrotters, as you, I don't know if you know it or not, but they have their own referee who travels with them. They were playing at the University of Akron in 1958. I was with the baseball team. We got the privilege of ushering for the game. There's a story before the game. We were out in the hallway. It was early. And there was a guy wandering the hallway. Looked like he was half inebriated. And my friends went up to him and said, "You got to have a ticket to get in here." He said, "I don't need no ticket. I am the ticket." Not a large level. Anyway, they got around to me and they said, "We need a local yokel to referee with the regular referee." And I said, "I referee the toughest league in the world, church leagues." So these guys, one referee in the church league, everybody was a star, and nobody fouled. Anyway, I said, "I'd like to do it." He said, "Well, you got to listen to the conditions first." So the conditions are, I said, "Well, I'm going to call a lot of fouls, because that's what referees do, call fouls." He said, "Call no fouls, no traveling, no 3-second rule, call in and out of bounds." "Well, I can handle it." "Well, you're going to get $10 to do it, but you'll become a professional, then you won't be able to play sports." But that's not true. So anyway, the game starts, and it's all scripted. As you know, they play the Washington Generals. And the Washington Generals, I think the latest record was Globetrotters 17,000 games. Washington Generals won 1. So the game starts, it's all scripted, and they said, one time they called a timeout. They said, "Here's what's going to happen the next play." In fact, Wilt Still was playing for them that year. Wilt's going to hit the ball on the jump ball on the way up. Your goal is to you run down to, he's going to throw it down to the basket. It's going to be dunked. You run down and you say, "No basket, no basket." So I did that, and everybody booed me. You know? Anyway, it was a good experience, and I was happy to hear some of these stories of the dope Basketeers.
All right, any final thoughts on what being a Basketeer meant? Do we have a question? Okay, go ahead.
Did you guys ever have was there ever a Basketeer named over with a parade, anything like that? You guys had it, or you guys actually were honored in Dover?
Well, actually, the Exchange Club honored us with a plate. It was 1997, so we were on the plate, but which is a great honor right there. But when we came back from New York in the summer of 1961, we were met at the New Philly Airport in cars, and we had a parade through New Philadelphia, I think Mayor Fraley, through Philly and into Dover. And when we came back from Hollywood, and I believe we drove down from Cleveland because we were somewhere near Strasburg when one of the guys said, "George, there's a cop behind us." and he said, "I'm not doing anything wrong, you know." And so when we got to City Field, there was everybody. And so then, you know, then we were treated to a luncheon. Colby, maybe, I don't know if you had any.
I think when you came back, they had cars lined up for you. I think you got out the wagon, you got in the convertibles and drove downtown. That's where they had had the luncheon. But that was a memorable moment, you know.
Any more questions?
Norm.
You know, I just wanted to say one thing, to thank you, Kimmy, for this program, because it's so important that we remember what these guys did. They literally put Dover on the map. And I say that in all honesty because one Sunday morning in church, Terry Simmons was sitting in the middle aisle, and I mentioned to the person beside me, I said, "You know, he was a Basketeer." And they had never heard of the Basketeers. So we need to do something like this every year or every couple of years to keep these guys in our remembrance. And I notice here, most all the folks are all gray-haired. So thank you, Kim.
Okay.
That's up to her.
Yeah. Well, one quick thing. They're on YouTube. So if you get on YouTube and search Dover Basketeers, you can find more than just the Errand Boy on there. You can find other clips of them playing basketball.
And we're recording this tonight, so at some point it will be on the library YouTube channel.
Oh, good, good.
One thing, and I look at it, and all three of us, so we know a lot of you, and thank you all for coming. But since he asked a question, I have to recognize Norm Singleton. If you're old enough, you remember he had that column for the Daily Reporter, Down the Line. Every year, he mentioned the Basketeers for the upcoming season. He would announce upcoming trips. And Norm, famously, you went with us in 1960 to New York City. We were there to play before an exhibition game with the Olympic basketball team, the 1960 team that was headed to Rome. And we performed at halftime before the game and also at halftime of that game. But Norm documented us. He documented that trip. And he's always been a special part of the Dover Basketeers as far as the writing and following us. You know, we all appreciate that.
And in regards to being elderly here, Pat Verducci tried to circumvent that. When she was at the middle school, every year George, Don, I think Jim, and she would have different Basketeers that would come up and not really put on, but George would talk and we just follow his lead more or less. But she wanted to just give us an exposure to the younger crowd to let them know. And a lot of those, they remembered, you know, because I would see them, and it's kind of fun to watch. I know you official, you know, it's good when you see kids when they're young and you watch them growing up. And when they're young, you can tell who's going to be who or who's going to be good. But you can see that when they were young, they were inquisitive, they wanted to know. And when they grew up, I mean, seniors, juniors in high school, they still remembered, you know, and they would often make comments about, oh, I remember you guys were at the middle school when we were there. And did you guys really do all that stuff?
I'm going to mention one other person too, and that is Bev Luthi, because she's the little sister to Jake Hammond. one of the originals. And he can't be here with us, and but just another connection, and appreciate all of that. Thank you very much.
Okay, they could go on forever, so we're gonna have to stop them. I got one more question. We'll do one more, the last question of the night.
Don't throw me out. Okay, this is for Jim Meese.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah, routine for us right now.
Well, I didn't have arthritis in my hand, a broken wrist. I might be able to do that.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Let's give them a big round of applause.